All right, welcome to the Franklin Community High School Career Exploration Project. Today we have with us a patrolman for the Franklin Police Department. Personally, my favorite because he was kind to me one day, so I obviously like him. Coming to us from an undisclosed location, we have Joe Dillon. Joe, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for
Uh,
having me.
So I guess the first question is just talk a little bit about your position, about what you do, and kind of any roles you may have had in the past to get up to that position.
Okay. I'm a patrolman, like you said. I've been at the Franklin Police Department for it'll be 21 years in March. Um, as a patrolman, sort of my essential function is I answer calls for service. Those can be emergency calls, so crashes or fights or whatever, or they can be some things that are a lot more mundane and things we do a little more often, like incomplete 911 calls or alarm calls, vehicle lockouts. Um, if you can think of a call, I've probably been there at some point or another. The thing about the police department is something about our job. When you can't figure out, if you can't solve it yourself and there's not somebody, I'm going to say in the phone book that can do it, you call the police department because we're always there. We're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Unlike most people today, nobody got a snow day at my work. None of the snow days. I've never had a snow day in 21 years. As a matter of fact, sometimes we have to work extra when there's bad weather. That's sort of what I do as a patrolman. But on top of that, part of the things that I'm assigned, I'm a field training officer, which means when new officers get hired, they'll ride with me, and we'll get into a little bit later on about the police academy. But after you go to the police academy, you have to come back to your own department, wherever you are, and you ride with field training officers, and they sort of help integrate you into the community. They teach you kind of the ins and outs of police work in your specific city or county. And then they help teach you about the rules that you have at your specific department. And it's sort of it's kind of a mentorship program where we teach these guys really to get them up to speed before we just send them out on their own in their car and let them do the job. That's one of my favorite roles at the police department. A couple other things I do, I'm on the scuba team. So we have a joint scuba team with Bargersville Police and the Johnson County Sheriff's Office. So I get to do that. I just started that back in October of last year. So I haven't had any real scuba call-outs, but I've had a couple of trainings. I'm a bike patrolman, so occasionally when we have events downtown, they let me ride a bike and pay me for it. That's kind of a cool gig. And then a couple other things that I really like, I'm an instructor. So I not only teach officers at my own department, but I will teach people at the police academy. They'll send us out there to teach the basic recruits. And I teach vehicle operations and strategies of patrol stops. So basically how to be safe, how to survive on traffic stops.
Right.
Driving instructing is one of my all-time favorite things. It's great because you get to go out there and just see what cars can do.
I was gonna say, is that like the skid stops and the 3-point turns or the
J do all that?
Is that what it's called?
We don't do J turns. I mean, we're not supposed to do J turns. We don't teach J turns, but
I got you.
I'd be lying to say that I haven't done one or two or five.
Were you a fan of the Dukes of Hazzard when you were a kid?
I love Dukes of Hazzard. Yep.
I mean, I think anyone who watched the Dukes of Hazzard instantly knew how to do a J turn.
Yeah, and I've not got to jump over a bridge yet, but someday I'm hoping to jump over.
You just got to have the right moment.
Hopefully, it's not presented itself, but someday.
We can only hope.
Yes.
So how did you get to be just a police officer? Like as far as your training or education, how did that come about?
So sort of what led me to this, it's kind of a strange, maybe not strange. When I was in second grade, not only did I like Dukes of Hazzard, I loved Indiana Jones. So I was going to be an archaeologist from second grade until my junior year in high school. High school was back in the 90s, and it was kind of a rare thing now, but kids nowadays, they get college credit all the time. But back in the 90s, you didn't really take college credits while you're in high school. Well, I happened to sign up for a class at the University of Indianapolis, and it was an archaeology class. And it was on Saturdays. There was no such thing as distance learning. So you physically had to go to campus every Saturday for the semester, and it bored me to tears. And I thought, there's no way I could. And I guess this was a little forward thinking on my part, but I thought there is no way I can do this as a career for 40 years. And maybe I shouldn't have let one class sour me on what I thought I wanted to do for the last 10 years, but it did. About that same time, I got into a little trouble in Greenwood that wasn't terribly bad, but the way the police department in Greenwood worked with me, basically they let me off of something that should have been a pretty serious thing. And I really respected them for that. And at the same time, there was a little show called Cops that came out. Mm-hmm. And that was something I would spend my weekends doing. So kind of a culmination of, I didn't want to be an archaeologist because it was boring. Cops looked like a pretty cool job. And I really, really respected the way Greenwood dealt with me. Like, well, maybe I'll think about taking some college classes. Well, I did. I took some classes at Fort Benjamin Harrison through Vincennes University. These classes were taught by a state trooper. I went twice a week after high school. I'd drive up to Fort Bend and take these classes. I absolutely fell in love with the idea of police work. So that's sort of what led me to police work. That would have been my end of my junior year, into my senior year of high school.
Okay. So, I mean, was it, when you started working, was it just something where, or like, as far as like the ride-alongs went, when you started doing ride-alongs, was that were you like, okay, yeah, I'm in on this now?
I did, and that's something I would encourage kids to do if they're interested in this line of work. Once you, a lot of places have gone away from the ride-along, and if you're not familiar with what that term means, Ice Cube did a show, a movie. Just watch it. It's totally legit. A ride-along, you actually sign a waiver. You hop in the car with the police department and you ride out and you do stuff. And I did that a couple times when I was in high school. You were able to do that as a 17, 18-year-old. That also helped further culminate or, convince me this is what I wanted to do. And I did more ride-alongs because after my senior year, I went to IU and then transferred up to IUPUI, but I majored in criminal justice. And then I'd start to get more exposure by doing these ride-alongs. And that's a really good, especially after you get into college, if you know this is what you want to do, after you've ridden a couple times, ride with various departments. And then that way, I don't want to be a state trooper because all they do is drive up and down the interstate. Or I don't want to work in the sheriff's office because I don't want to do that. Or I don't want to work in this city, but I do like the way they work in this city. So it kind of helps you narrow down a specific, kind of like when you're thinking about what factory would I want to work at. You can't go test out all these factories, but you can kind of go test out police departments, believe it or not. It's kind of a cool gig. So that's something I would encourage people to do, are ride-alongs. But like I said, I was in college at IU, up to IUPUI. I got my bachelor's degree, and there's something about law enforcement agencies in Indiana. I can't think of any that require you to have more than a high school diploma. Some of them are high school diploma or GED. But with that said, you're never, ever, ever going to get hired at this time and with just that minimum requirement. There are people that are applying with bachelor's degrees, with associate's degrees, guys that have spent 2 or 3 deployments in the military. Especially those two things coupled together, college and military, would be a phenomenal basis to get you hired into a police department.
Yeah. That kind of experience you have, that instantly gets you right where you need to be.
It's really helpful. And a lot of police work, it's a strange occupation. There's a lot of maturity that you have to have going into this job. And it's not uncommon for people to apply at a police department and not get hired until they're 25, 26, 28 years old, because you haven't reached a certain level of emotional maturity and growing up that you need to do before you get hired for this job. I'll call it fortunate and unfortunate. I got hired at 23, which was pretty rare. We tend to stay away. I say we as law enforcement tend to stay away from the younger hires. You're eligible in the state of Indiana to be hired as a police officer at 21 years old. It's pretty uncommon for a 21-year-old to get hired.
Yeah. There's a lot you've still got to learn and how to handle certain situations and everything like that at 21. So.
There's a lot of, and I just field trained a young kid, and I call him young because he's the age of some of my kids. phenomenal. He's going to be a phenomenal officer if he sticks with it. He didn't have life experience, and that really it showed in some of his performance as far as in dealing with people. He wasn't as solid as he could have been if not for just having more experience in life.
Right. Yeah. So when you see like the cop shows when you were younger and live PD now, is that a good representation of what you've got, or is that kind of like the highlight of something?
It is the highlight reel. It's kind of watching, the 20 minutes of Sports Center to see what happened in all the football games over the weekend. It's not a very solid representation of what we do. I'm trying to think of what the phrase is. It's something like we spend days and days and days of boredom to experience 30 seconds of sheer exhilaration / terror. And that's what we do. You think about when I first got hired when I was in college, I thought, oh, we're going to be kicking down doors and serving warrants and chasing people down alleys and in vehicle pursuits every day. It just doesn't happen. And it doesn't matter if you work in a city like Franklin or if you work in a city like Indianapolis. You're going to have those things. They're going to be maybe more frequent in different areas, but you're not going to have them on a daily basis where you're knocking in doors unless maybe if you get assigned to a SWAT team and that's all you do in Indianapolis and you guys just serve high-risk warrants all day. If you're on some sort of fugitive recovery team that you work for the U.S. Marshal Service, okay, you might be kicking in doors, but most likely you're going to be sitting in a car drinking coffee watching this guy's grandma's house hoping that he'll show up from the crack dealer, or you're watching 2 or 3 of his ex-girlfriend's houses hoping he'll show up because he skipped his bond hearing. It's probably a lot more surveillance than it is kicking indoors, even in some of those high speed teams.
Right.
So no, the shows are not an accurate representation. The thing that really gets me, like Cops is pretty good. I mean, Cops and Live PD, those are okay because they're showing you what's going on. But shows like CSI, where they've got the crime scene investigator who's not only is he responded to the call sometimes before the police, he's carrying a gun, he's doing fingerprints, he's checking DNA, he's writing reports, he's testifying in front of he's making I'm like, crime scene investigators, very, very valuable occupation. They're great. I love our guy that does our CSI, but he doesn't do a lot of what you see in those shows.
Yeah.
He has a specific thing that he does. He's not interviewing suspects.
Right.
So
he's not out there with a gun trying to find the perps out there.
He is not kicking down doors and chasing cars. He is cataloging evidence. Thank you, Mark, for all your help. But yeah.
So I can't think of too many jobs that would have like higher highs and lower lows as a police officer. So what are some of the pros, some of the things that are those highs? Obviously that you can sit there and talk about helping people and all
oh
that.
yeah.
And then some of the cons, some of the things that you don't like.
Well, and I'll even discuss, especially with the pros, because it's not always about the highs that you see, because a lot of times you don't see the end result of the work product that you put in always. And this is sort of the meat and potatoes of any job. It's got pretty good pay. It's got great benefits. I've got a public pension that will pay me once I retire if I reach a certain. So in Indiana, most law enforcement agencies are on the perf retirement. You have to have 50. You have to be 52 years old and have at least 20 years of service before you can retire. So, and I don't do anything extra. It's going to happen as long as I stick around and work and don't get myself fired or hurt before then. So that's one of the benefits. It's got pretty good job security up until, the end of last year. There wasn't a whole lot of talk about closing police departments. I mean, video stores close, liquor stores close, restaurants close, factories close, but usually police departments are well funded and they stay funded indefinitely. Again, that could change. We'll see. Hopefully not. Another good perk of the job, a pro, I'll call it, is that even though we do a lot of the same stuff every day, it's different every day. The scenarios presented to you at school every day are probably similar, but and they're always at school. Like my scenarios may be similar, but it's one day I might be at, a house on Jefferson Street, or I might be in an apartment out by the interstate, or I might be at a gas station, and it's the same call, but it's 3 different scenarios. And then I have different players all the time.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting. It always changes. So it's very dynamic in that aspect. It's fun to some degree, and we do have to exercise a lot of restraint, but I get to drive fast. I get to ride a bike, like I said. Last week or a week and a half ago, we had scuba training. We literally used a chainsaw to cut a hole in ice, and we practiced self-ice rescue. So we got to jump in the water in these big warm suits and then drag ourselves out of the freezing water. So that was kind of cool. I mean, not many people were doing that last week.
Right.
So the highs, there are some highs, like, and if you've ever watched Cops for Life, PD, after you catch somebody who's running from you, or you get a resistor in handcuffs, there's some high fives and some back slapping. We have to be cognizant of that we don't celebrate too awful much, or we get a penalty just like they do in the NFL. Especially because we are all getting body cameras at Franklin. We're all getting assigned cameras in the next couple weeks,
right?
Which is great. I love it. But an off-the-cuff comment that should have been probably something not ever said in the first place could really hang you out to dry. And those are where we start talking about some of the cons. You have lots of freedom as a police officer. I'll drive around all day. I'll do my thing. I'll respond to radio calls. I'll make traffic stops. But there's not a lot of direct supervision over me, because they understand that we're pretty self-motivated for the most part. We're pretty well able to take care of things on our own without having somebody following us around. But that freedom can also get you into a lot of trouble. If you're not self-motivated, you can be sitting in parking lots for hours and hours. You can be playing video games, not so much on your computer because it's all locked down, but you can be on your phone and not doing police work. You could be visiting your ex-girlfriend's house or your current girlfriend's house, or both houses on your shift, and that can get into a little trouble. You could be, it doesn't happen very often, but several years ago, there was an officer in Indianapolis that was arrested on duty. He was involved in a vehicle crash. He was drunk and killed somebody. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of things that you can do. That freedom can also, if you're not able to constrain yourself, it can get you in a lot of trouble, and get you in prison, actually. So you got to be careful. Some of the lows, unfortunately, and this is just the ugly side of law enforcement, we see people at their very lowest. Nobody calls me to say, oh, I just want to let you know I won the lottery. I just want to let you know my kids are having a birthday party. I just want to let you know that everything's going great between me and my wife. We're not arguing. Nobody calls us when things are going cool. It's always, hey, grandma didn't wake up. She's in the back room. We don't know what to do. I'm like, well, we need to call the coroner. Or, I go to their house because their dog got out, or their kid's bike got stolen, or because they just crashed their car in a Walmart parking lot. Every time I go there, a lot of times it might be the worst day of their life, and it becomes routine to us, but it also wears on an officer. Yeah. So there are the negatives, the ugly side of police work, where we have increased suicide risks. We have increased risk for substance abuse. We have high divorce rates. We have coronary problems, and it has to do with cortisol and all kinds of chemicals and stuff. But when we start our shift, we'll just call it at level 1. We're already hyped up to level 3. And then that first call, we get to level 5 and we never get back down to level 1. And then the next call, we're at level 7 and we never get back down to level 1. And by the end of the day, we're so wired. Mm-hmm. On your heart. And then some of you may have noticed that not all of us are the most fit. There's something to be said about sitting in a car for 12 hours a day eating McDonald's. It doesn't do a body well. So, yeah, believe it or not, kids, McDonald's is not good.
You need to manufacture more chases, like foot chases.
Foot chases?
Yeah.
I like it, but I'm not very good at foot chases unless people are drunk or, well, I don't know. I'm probably 50-50 on most foot chases. And the people that have gotten away, it's usually the same couple of guys that get away. But you already know who they are. But they're fast.
I know where they're going. So
Curtis is fast. And what's funny, one of the funniest things about dealing with people, you think bad guys, wearing a mask, they've just got a mean scowl all the time. They're carrying around the bag with the dollar signs. You'll have a guy, and I'm going to use Curtis as an example because I'm not going to mention last names. Curtis used to run from me all the time back. I've been doing this 21 years. He was probably See, I'm 44. He's probably 35 now. And he would run away, and then we would finally arrest him several weeks later after we issued a warrant, picked him up, brought him to jail. And then I'd see him at a house. I'm like, hey, where did you hide that time? He's like, oh, it was behind the woodpile. You guys walked right past me. And I'm like, dang. And then just the other day, I stopped by Penn Station, and he was in the parking lot, and I started talking to him. And I'm like, well, how long have you been out of prison? You know, that's a very common conversation for me to have with somebody at Walmart. I'm like, how long have you been out of prison? He's like, oh, I've been out for 6 months. I'm doing really good. I'm like, awesome. Good for you. He's probably back in prison now, by the way. I would venture to guess there's a high likelihood. A term you'll learn in college, if you haven't learned it already, if you take criminal justice programs, is recidivism. And there's a very high recidivism rate with criminals. It's like 60 to 90%, depending on what your crime of choice is, your crime du jour. I'm going to circle back to something real quick. I just thought about this. I keep talking about I went to IU and I got my criminal justice degree. I actually went back and got a master's degree, again, in criminal justice for no other reason than I was kind of bored and wanted to do some more learning. But there is no requisite when you get hired at a department. It doesn't make you a more solid candidate if you are able to tell them, oh, I have a criminal justice degree versus I have a degree in English, or I have a degree in political science, or a degree in psychology, or a degree in whatever. If you've got a degree in engineering, go be an engineer or whatever. I mean, but there's a lot of like Bachelor of Science or Associates of Science type degrees that are solid degrees, because what you really need as a police officer, and this is something that's vitally important, is you have to be able to express yourself in written language. Everybody that's listening to this interview knows the Miranda rights. Mm-hmm. Law enforcement officer, you have the right to remain silent. Anything that you say, you've heard it a million times. Well, if you think back, if you trace that back, the whole reason there's a Miranda right is because there was a Supreme Court case. And before that Supreme Court case ever happened, there was an officer who wrote a report when he arrested, I think his name was Frank Miranda. So this officer wrote a report that went to his chief or his sergeant. They reviewed it. Then it went to an investigator. Then it went to their local district attorney or prosecutor's office. And it went to a local court. And then it went to a state court. And eventually it ended up on the desk of the Supreme Court. So if you can't write an intelligent, expressive report, then you're not a super viable candidate for this job. So I would say you need to learn how to do English well. You need to learn how to write well to express yourself. And it's not a creative writing class so much, although sometimes our reports have to get somewhat creative. I used to be able to write when I would write for college. I would write pretty eloquently, I guess you would call it. And now it's more of like facts. It's more just facts. And when I try to write, it doesn't come off as cool as it used to. But you need to be able to write.
That's the 21-year vet in you, right? Is the 1 year vet. I want to get as many details in here as possible. Talk about who said this, who said that. Now you're like just boom, 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 boom. I'm done.
Yeah, but you have to be able to. You have to set a mood, paint a picture. You can't just say saw drunk, arrested, same. That used to be how people would write. Saw drunk, arrested, same. That's not going to cut it. You're going to have to talk about all the things that go into making somebody believe you were drunk. What did you see, you smell, you hear, you felt? God forbid, what did you taste? But, all your senses have to come into play when you're writing your reports. And it's just vitally important that you capture sort of the essence of whatever the scene was. It's going to be, I don't want to say less important now that we have body cameras. I think sometimes people get an over-reliance. Anytime there's scrutinization or something that happened, like, well, let's see the body camera video. Well, that doesn't always accurately reflect what was going on. Or B, it may just not be available. Believe it or not, sometimes we forget to turn them on. I know that's going to happen, so I'm just putting that out there. We forget to turn them on. We forget to turn them off, which sometimes gets us in more trouble. They malfunction, they don't work or whatever. So just because it's not on camera, we shouldn't rely on that in lieu of our reports. We should always write solid reports. And then public speaking. I was absolutely 100%. I was that kid that would sit in the back, and anytime we had to do a speech in high school, and I'd be like, oh, I'm just going to sit back here and hope they don't call on me, knowing that at some point they're going to call on me and then I'm going to have to go. And I'd be like, sweating bullets having to go up in front of class. And then I took a public speaking class at IU just because it was for credit. It's not because I enjoyed it. And then the more I've had to get out, and literally you get out of a car at the scene of a crash or at a fight or a domestic, you got to sort of public speak. That's part of your job. You better learn how to do it, and you better do it pretty effectively. You got to get people separated or calmed down or moved out of the way or whatever. So you learn to be a better public speaker, I hope. What else? I'm sure I've gone off on a tangent.
No, you're fine.
Let's think of other cons. I was thinking of pros and cons. One other con that I had written down, and this is sort of whether you like it or not, it's part of it, but you're held to, as a police officer, you're held to a higher standard. Mm-hmm. So I could go get a DUI tonight, and it's going to be all over the paper, all over the news. I'm not on duty. I'm not in my patrol car, but officer arrested for DUI, officer arrested for battery. Teachers are in the same boat. A teacher gets arrested for DUI or a battery or something. It's all over the paper. Whereas the guy that works down the street at the restaurant, or the fellow that works at the factory, or the lady that works over at the hospital, it's never going to make the newspaper.
Right.
It doesn't change it a blip. And I think it was Tony Gwynn. He used to play. He played baseball for the Padres. There was a lot of scrutiny back in the days. They're like, well, athletes are held to a higher standard, and they shouldn't be. And he's like it or not, that's the truth, and you need to just accept it. And he was. I wouldn't say pro for the you should be held to a higher standard, but he's like, it's part of it. So suck it up, Buttercup. Deal with it. And that's how I am. And for a short while, I was teaching at Ivy Tech also. That's what I could do with my master's degree. I put it to work. But I went out to Ivy Tech, and I was teaching a couple law enforcement classes because that's sort of how I got into the job. And there was something we talk about, the newspaper test. If there's something you wouldn't want on the front page of the newspaper, then don't do it. It's more applicable to when you're working. But if you wouldn't do it in front of your preacher, you wouldn't do it in front of your wife, wouldn't do it in front of your grandma, and you wouldn't want it on the front page of the paper, then don't do it. Don't say it, or whatever the circumstance is. But that's sort of the newspaper test that we always talk about. And I don't mind being held to a higher standard because I'm most likely probably at a higher standard than a lot of people.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the position, is in a role where you're protecting or people are looking up to you, then you're going to want to hold yourself to a higher standard. So whether that's, preacher, teacher, police officer, anything like that, where I think that's part of what comes with it.
And that's actually that not being a hypocrite is something I preach to my field training officer, or the rookies that I have all the time with me. I'm like, don't drive like a jerk and then expect to go out there and write speeding tickets to people that are driving like you're driving, because that's hypocritical and it's going to bite you in the butt someday. If nothing else, it just should make you morally feel bad. It should affect your conscience. So don't run stoplights. Don't do things that are illegal or wrong that you're going to, hold people to the fire for. It's just not right. So that's something that I teach to, and that's a lot of things I do are one of my favorite things. So that's probably why I've been doing this for 21 years and don't have any plans on stopping, because I have a lot of my favorite things. Yeah. But field training is one of my favorite things. So I like teaching new guys, hopefully passing on just part of what I've learned the hard way over 21 years. Like, don't learn this the hard way. Don't drive like an idiot, because it will come back to bite you in the butt if it doesn't kill or injure somebody in the meanwhile. So there's a lot of things like that's, again, just part of the reason a lot of people don't get hired at 21 years old, fresh out of college. They just don't have that life experience to.
Yeah. So when you see like a person coming in, what kind of characteristics do they have where you're like, hey, I think this is like the kid we talked about earlier who you trained. Mm-hmm. What's he got that you say, yeah, I know this kid is going to be good? And then conversely, I'm sure you've seen some guys who you've been like, yeah, they are not going to cut it. What are some of those things, those characteristics there? And also, like, how would someone prepare for a role or a career in law enforcement?
Okay. So we do, as a department, we do a pretty good job, and I guess in the hiring process. So you fill out an application, and then there's several steps. So they do a pretty good job of weeding out people that are no good. And I'll circle back to that here in a little while. I keep saying we'll circle back. I think that's something that one of Biden's people says, isn't it? I'm probably going to be on a meme somewhere with Bernie Sanders. So some characteristics of people that I know that are going to be good. You have to be patient. That's one thing that's very important. You're going to be tested. People are going to, intentionally or not intentionally, you have to be patient because people are going to test you. You have to be even-tempered. I get a lot of times from my family, like, oh, you don't really seem to get up here and you don't really seem to get down here. You're just always sort of pretty even-keeled. And I think that's vitally important when you go to a scene of, you walk in and there's a guy who just shot himself in the chest with a shotgun. You got to stay pretty even-keeled. You can't be, oh my God, you can't go into hysterics. And you can't get really low either. You can't be crying because, oh my God, that's horrible. I feel bad for people. I mean, you got to be pretty even-keeled. You have to be self-motivated. There's a lot of freedom, and if you don't motivate yourself, you might not do real well in this job for a long duration. You need the ability to reason on the cuff, think on your feet. You have to be able to reason quickly, problem solve. I think it's Malcolm Gladwell, one of my favorite authors, writes about how people in high stress, high risk jobs, have to make very quick, life or death decisions. And people like firefighters and EMTs and doctors and police officers, they have this ability to make these really fast, really good decisions. And when you go back and review those decisions,
it's in Blank, right?
It might have been in Blink.
Yeah.
I got, I think, all of his books, but he talks about when they have to make those decisions, they don't always, and people will say this a lot of times, they'll look at a video of a police officer's interaction with the guy and they're like, oh, he should have done this. And not being in the moment and not realizing a lot about law enforcement, about our tactics, about our procedures, about constitutional law. What the officer may have done was perfectly legal, perfectly acceptable by all standards. Was there a better option? Yes. And Malcolm Gladwell talks about this. He's like, they make really good on-the-spot, off-the-cuff decisions. They're not always the premier decision they could have made, but they're acceptable decisions. And that's just part of, we have to take that when it comes to jobs that like law enforcement or firefighting or, crab fishing. I don't know, other jobs where you have to make crazy decisions like that. And you have to be ethical. That's another thing. So ultimately, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. When you swear yourself in court, if they catch you lying, A, it's perjury, it's a felony, you'll go to jail, but B, it'll tarnish your reputation. So the next time you turn in a report, they're like, oh, that's the guy that was arrested. Obviously, if you're arrested for perjury, you're probably not going to be turning in very many more reports other than here's all my badge and gun and come pick up my car. But if you even put the notion into the minds of the public, the prosecutor, the defense attorneys, that you're not a solid, ethical, reputable, honest person, they may not file your charges against people because they're like, well, is he actually making this stuff up? And unfortunately, that happens. I haven't seen it here, but you'll hear about it every once in a while where an officer just straight up planted a bag of dope or lied about something that happened. It's like, why? Why would you ever do that? I mean, it's not hard to take people to jail, to write tickets, to do whatever you need to do if they're doing something wrong. So you don't need to create circumstances to make that happen. So patience, even-tempered, self-motivated, the ability to think on their feet, ethical. Those are all good things. Yeah.
How would, I know you talked earlier about, public speaking and writing composition type. Are there any other things you could think of that maybe a high school student could do to prepare for a career in law enforcement?
Well, so my favorite class is not so much English, but I didn't dislike English. I liked psychology, sociology, those sorts of classes. And if you go to college for a criminal justice major, you're going to have a lot of those social science classes. But things that you can do in addition to just at school, I know that C9 has a criminal justice program. I was out there this year. It was last semester. I was out there and I helped teach some traffic stop techniques.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I'm an instructor in. The sheriff's office, they used to have a program called the Explorers. I'm gonna dumb this down. It kind of was like Cub Scouts for law enforcement. Like you'd put on your uniform and you go pal around with the police. It's a little bit more than that. It's a lot more than that. So I don't want to dumb it down. But it's now called the Public Safety Cadets. That's through the sheriff's office here in Johnson County. So the guy that is in charge of that is Jim Ingmart.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's people that are watching this and they're interested, hook up with Jim. And I think it's kids like 14 to 19 can go, and they'll teach you some basic police stuff. And you actually can get hooked up to do some ride-alongs, and that's one of the best ways to do it if you're under 18 is to do it through that cadet program.
Yeah. Okay.
What else? Ride-alongs. When you go to college, just make sure you take the right sorts of classes. If you're able to be fluent in another language, it really doesn't matter which language. Obviously, Spanish is helpful now, but I don't know anybody that's going to learn Burmese, but there are some other languages that might not be so helpful, but it never hurts. I mean, if you know sign language, we have to call sign language interpreters. You never know. You may run across a dude that's speaking French that you need to speak French to. So a foreign language is good. English is good. Public speaking is good. Some other things I would tell kids specifically: make good decisions, because especially right now, because that's going to talk to the character 5 years from now when they're thinking about hiring you. If you're making crappy decisions, you get arrested for a DUI, you get arrested for drugs. You're going to show up, especially if you're in college and you get arrested there's some minor things like a minor alcohol possession. There's some things that they're going to expect, maybe a battery in there, but you start getting into some more serious crimes. It's ultimately going to come down in the hiring process, maybe to you and this other guy, and the other guy doesn't have this criminal record. And I call it a criminal record. One arrest is a mistake. It happens. But you have to really be at that higher level, because this guy's not going to have it and he's going to have the job and you're going to get screwed out of it. Piercings and tattoos. Some departments they've started to loosen up, not so much on piercings, but tattoos. Some departments have loosened up their standards. But think about you go and get whatever, a tattoo on your shoulder or something across your knuckles that you can't cover up. I know the sheriff's office, like right now in Franklin, our tattoo policy is they can be visible. They can't be, I think, on your neck or above, and they can't be offensive. So no cuss words, nothing like that. No crazy pictures.
That makes sense.
But our sheriff's office, their tattoo policy is no visible tattoos. Mm. So if you go and get a big old tattoo on your forearm down here, come 90-degree weather, guess what? You're wearing long sleeves. It doesn't matter that you're hot. Mm-hmm. A tattoo there, and there's nothing you can do about it, and that's the policy of your agency. So think about, before you start tattooing or piercing your body, what sort of jobs you want in the future. I'm not telling you can't do that, but that's just something that might inhibit or cause you to have some extra. Well, you have to wear long sleeves when it's hot out.
Yeah, like a little extra heat in the summer.
A little extra heat. And then something that's more relevant now than it definitely than it was back when I was a kid, was be careful of what you post on social media. When they do our background investigations, we get people that wash out of the background investigation at our department only because of what they put on their social media. They're like, oh, I'm a good guy, straight A's through college, everything looks good. But then you get on there and every weekend he's at some party where he's just trashed, yelling at girls or doing things that are inappropriate. It's like, if that's his character when we're not watching him, that's the sort of character we're also going to see when we're not watching him, because we're going to hire him and pay him, and he's going to go out and he's going to do his job, but he's going to be doing dumb stuff. We don't want that guy at our department. We don't want that girl at our department that's doing stupid things that's going to tarnish the reputation of everybody that does the right thing. And God forbid they do it on duty. Then it becomes, not only is it just, it makes the department look bad, but it can cost us money. Certainly will cost them their job. So just be careful of social media. Yeah. Don't put dumb stuff. Don't respond to comments. Just stay away from it.
All right. So I'm going to get you out of here on this one. Last question for you. Okay. Just general advice for high school students. I know you just went over some, but just life advice even as someone who is a father to five, was there
Yeah,
five kids? Five
five.
kids,
Yeah.
and the youngest of which just made it to college, correct?
Yes, the
Uh,
youngest two are both in college. I've got 3 of 5 are in college right now. So,
so just general advice.
um, God, I'm gonna sound like an old man. Stay off your phones. Just pay attention. Stay off your phones. Do the right thing. The There's a show. I don't watch a lot of cop shows, but I did watch for a short time a show called Blue Bloods with Tom Selleck. Mainly because I had Tom Selleck, and not because I have a crush, but because I like Magnum PI.
I mean, his voice is, he could read
Dreamy.
anything, and
It's dreamy.
yeah, absolutely dreamy.
In his job, he was the commissioner of the New York City Police Department. But he said, do the right thing at the right time for the right reason. And just that sort of live by that philosophy. If you can do the right time at the right, or do the right thing at the right time for the right reason, you're probably not going to be steered too far off the path to become a police officer. Return your carts at the Walmart, at Walmart, hold the door for people, just be a decent human being. And that will carry over into how you live your life. Good things will happen to you, in my opinion. So
Yeah. Yeah,
hopefully
absolutely. How you treat people is going to come back around for you.
it will.
Yeah.
And even if you're being treated poorly, because that's part of this job, you can't retaliate. You can't be a vengeful person. I didn't put that on my list, but that is definitely something that's on there. People are going to do stuff that are bad to you, and you're not going to like it. They're going to say things, and they're going to hit you, and they're going to kick you, and they're going to spit at you. You can't be vengeful, and that's just part of it. So just be a good human being, and you will likely set yourself up well for this particular line of work. Actually, for everything in life, if you're just a decent human being, you'll set yourself up pretty well for life.
Yep. That is good advice from someone who has had who's got 5 kids, and I think any parent would throw that advice out there too. I'm sure my parents told me that a few times, but I'm not sure, and then I have to check it. So what doesn't really matter. Yeah. So once again, Joe, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Joe Dillon, police officer, patrolman at the Franklin Police Department. Joe, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.